came here in April 1963, 7 months before Kennedy's assassination in Dallas. She fell deeply in love with a man she met here, who was to change her life forever. That man was Lee Harvey Oswald.
Lee Oswald was an innocent man who gave his life for his country, who was a loyal Marine to the very end, and he deserves better in history than the vile portrait of him that's been painted. This is a man who is a hero, and I stand as a witness to that. Period.
Judith's story, told here for the first time, changes forever our understanding of Lee Harvey Oswald and his role in history. That story begins in Bradenton, Florida, where as a young schoolgirl, Judith excelled in science, as her sister Linda explains.
By the time she was in high school, she was extremely dedicated to her work. And when I say to her work, it was her scientific studies, her projects that she worked on. And she always had this interest in cancer research. She wanted to be the person who could cure cancer, and she was determined to do that.
Her exceptional abilities were soon drawing local and then national attention.
When I was in high school, I noticed that I was focusing on things that were of interest to the military. My work with cancer, my work with, getting metal out of seawater and all that, excited a great deal of interest. I gave lung cancer to mice faster than it had ever been done before, with all their big labs and everything else. They were astonished. And they even went to my school and checked everything out, and of course I had all the proof. All the doors opened from there. I found myself invited as soon as I could graduate. I was sent to Buffalo, New York, to the oldest and most prestigious, at that time, cancer research center in the United States, Roswell Park Memorial Institute for Cancer Research, under the auspices of Dr. Deal and Dr. Ochsner.
Dr. Alton Ochsner, one of the world's leading cancer specialists, was fiercely anti-communist. He was to play a crucial role in Judith's life. Without realizing it, she was being subtly drawn into clandestine research work. This became apparent in 1962, when she became a full-time student at the University of Florida in Gainesville.
I was getting specialized in deadly cancers. It was made clear to me by the time I entered the University of Florida, they didn't want people knowing that we were working on projects that might have to do with eventually competing with Russia on the matter of using cancer as a bioweapon.
She was very gullible. She didn't have people experience. She was always in a laboratory working. So yeah, she was very capable of being taken advantage of without ever knowing it until it was too late.
In the spring of 1963, Judith was invited to join Dr. Ochsner in New Orleans on a temporary assignment. It was an exciting offer for the young scientist. The Ochsner Clinic and its founder were world-renowned.
Dr. Alton Ochsner, who was famous as the first physician to link smoking and cancer, and who had many military and government connections, he said he needed me there, and that he wanted me to work in the bone cancer lab with Dr. Mary Sherman. Dr. Mary Sherman was working on some cutting-edge research, and the blood sedimentation work I was doing they thought would be valuable. On top of that, he'd been telling me what to do for a couple of years now, and was interested in everything I was doing. This man was virulently anti-Castro, and he knew about my anti-Castro feelings.
Judith arrived in New Orleans on April 20th, 1963, 2 weeks before she was to meet Ochsner. She was a naive 19-year-old, alone for the first time in a big city. She was to be joined 10 days later by her fiancé, Robert Baker. While she awaited his arrival, Judith took a room at the YWCA, close to the downtown area. The following week, she went to the main post office to pick up a letter from her husband-to-be.
As I asked for the letter from Robert Baker and obtained it, when I reached for it, I dropped the newspaper, and this very clean-cut young gentleman standing behind me picked it up and handed it back. I looked at him, and he smiled, and he's young like I am, and he was so clean-cut and so polite that when he asked me if he could walk me home, I said yes. That was how I met Lee Harvey Oswald for the first time. have to call it instant chemistry. I never felt such an attraction for anyone, either then or ever in my life since. He was love at first sight, and I know he felt the same way about me too.
New Orleans was Oswald's hometown, and overnight he became Judith's guide and protector. The first person he introduced her to was a man he called Dr. David Ferry, a close friend. They met in a local restaurant.
He was wearing an airline captain pilot's hat, and he had his pilot's jacket on and a ring, and here I'd been told he was Dr. David Ferry, but now I also realized he was Captain David Ferry, had been with Eastern Airlines. This is a man who probably could talk to you on any subject at length. He could discourse on anything, and he could speak knowledgeably to me about cancer research even. He was actually, he said, working on a project. He would like me to see it. He knew who Ochsner was. He not only knew Dr. Mary Sherman, she was his friend. So all of these things were of great interest to me. I wanted very much to know more about this strange man, Dr. David Ferry, who was also the captain.
Later that day, Oswald took Judith to David Ferry's apartment in this suburb of New Orleans. Unwittingly, she was being drawn into a deadly game.
David Ferry's apartment was the upper half of a white Spanish-style building, and we entered from the back. People who knew David Ferry would not enter from the front. So as we sat down, we're sitting down on an antique piece of furniture from his mother. He has nice chintz curtains, but the rest of it looks like 6 or 7 garage sales all slammed together. He had a book on nursing and surgical procedures, how to do operations. He had the DIFCO manual, and nobody has the DIFCO manual unless they're doing cancer research or other kinds of tissue culture and so on. We were there not only most of the day, but all night long that night. And I took reams of notes on what he was saying.
To Judith's amazement, Ferry began to talk about a secret government medical project against Castro, involving himself and Mary Sherman, overseen by Alton Ochsner.
I knew that Dr. Ochsner had been working on a variety of different projects, and that because of his association with anti-Castro people such as David Ferry, this seemed very possible to me that Dr. Ochsner and Dr. Sherman might be involved with David Ferry. And of course he spoke knowledgeably of both people.
However, following a raucous party at Ferry's apartment, Judith began to have reservations about her exotic new friends and their wild claims.
I was already falling in love with Lee Oswald, but I didn't know him that well. So I was concerned, and I asked Lee to show me. I need to find out, really, is the government really involved in this? I might be being lied to. I hadn't even met Dr. Ochsner yet and wasn't supposed to for another few days.
To reassure Judith of his official status, Oswald took her downtown to meet another close associate, Guy Bannister, a former FBI man now operating as a private investigator.
There on the wall, there it was. This man was the head of the FBI in Chicago. He carried a beautiful big gun right there in his shoulder holster. He had all kinds of credentials, and he affirmed that Lee was working on an anti-Castro project. That was good enough for me.
Judith was even more impressed when Lee later took her to the 3rd floor of Bannister's building, where she saw assorted military equipment stored.
Lee told me that he was in New Orleans for several reasons. One of them was to make a training film, and that he was working with these anti-Castro insurgents to help teach some of these young Cubans how to use ammunition, how to, do their guns, how to fire, and all that. He was part of this, but he had several other projects he was also working on. He was a very busy man there.
Less than a week in New Orleans had turned Judith's life upside down. With the arrival of her fiancé, Robert Baker, she faced a difficult choice.
I knew I was falling in love with Lee Oswald, and I knew Lee was falling in love with me. And yet I had strong feelings for Robert Baker, whom I'd known for 10 months. Lee told me at that time that he had beaten his wife, Marina, and he was sorry, and we talked about that, and I told him that that was really disgusting to me. And I wanted nothing to do with anyone who was violent. I believe if Lee had not told me that, I don't believe I would have married Robert Baker.
But she did.